folks, welcome to another episode of the Snowy's Camping Show. You're joined as usual by myself, Ben, and my colleague Lauren. How are you, Lauren?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. Hey, if you've not joined us before and you haven't already done so, please subscribe via YouTube or your favourite podcast app. And you can join in on the conversation at our Snowy's Camping Show Facebook group, where us and our community of listeners and followers are all joining in on the conversation, asking questions, and you can have your say or ask any questions you like there. Today, we've got another interview. It's a CFS interview, and we have on the line Phil McDonough. I hope I got that right. Lauren got it right before. I hope I got it right. How are you, Phil?
Yeah, good, thanks, and close enough.
Okay, I'm glad you're happy with it. Hey, now we've got written here that you're a strategy and compliance officer. Is that right? Just tell us a little bit about your position and yourself in the CFS.
Okay, so obviously in the Country Fire Service, we're broken into different streams. So I work in the preparedness operations. That's a technical term for prevention area. And basically I deal with a lot of the legislation and compliance type issues.
Okay, and you've been roped in for the podcast today to tell us all things relevant with or related to what campers, hikers need to know when they're hiking, touring, and being safe with regards to fires in the outback or anywhere really. Now, Lauren, I'm going to throw to you because you've written these notes here. Our first questions, travelling during the high season.
Well, I'm actually going to throw it back to Phil because I am aware there's recently been some regulation changes around maybe gas stoves and things like that can affect campers. Can you fill us in on that, Phil?
Yeah, that's right. So in previous years, if you were out caravanning, camping and the like, and there was what we call a total fire ban day, you couldn't use devices such as camping stoves or even slide-out kitchens from caravans or even gas barbecues in caravan parks or layaways or any free camp type situations. So we instigated a bit of a regulation change so that caravan parks and the like are now exempt from that. So you can actually have your gas barbecues and you can do external cooking in caravan parks on a total fire ban day, but you still are not permitted to do it in layaways or free camp or whatever unless you have specific permits issued to you to actually do so.
Okay. So that's just caravan parks? Does that exclude national parks? So where are the boundaries there?
Yeah, so national parks have their own legislation. Okay. So basically the use of physical fire is normally not permitted during the fire danger season at all, and that's separately legislated. But when it comes to gas cooking devices, the new changes are not with national parks. So it's only caravan parks. And we actually slipped in there a little terminology for commercial businesses. So previously you could only even use your gas barbecues at home as long as you were within 15 metres of your house. But that didn't take into account, and Lordy B, the Bunnings barbecues, because it's not a house, it's a commercial business. So we actually snuck in the commercial business as well, so we could keep the Aussie tradition of the Bunnings barbecues going as well.
All right.
Got to keep the Bunnings barbecues going.
Keep them going, yeah.
Yeah, but with onion though, right?
I think I've got a few other questions which I think we'll ask later in a few questions down the track on sort of the confusion around gas and the type of fuels you can use in stoves, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. We've got here, firstly, sort of touching on some guidelines in people who are travelling during, we've said the high season. By that, in this respect, means travelling during fire ban season or when high risk season for fire. What have you got? Primary considerations, just a basic list of primary considerations for people who are heading out in high risk fire season.
Yeah, look, a couple of the key things are that you need to be prepared and have the information before you go. A lot of the places that you may want to go to hike, to camp, etc., you may not have physical phone reception, which actually adds to the difficulty because I would normally refer people to our website, which will give them all the can I, can't I's. If there's a total fire ban, check check here, check there. But if you're going to camp somewhere and you're going to have very poor or no reception, then you need to do that planning before you go. Now, you can access on the Bureau of Meteorology site up to 4 days in advance. So if you're going for a long weekend, you can generally get an idea of what the fire weather potential is going to be and whether potentially there's going to be any total fire bans.
So, Phil, just to stop you there, sorry, with the bomb app that you mentioned, are you saying that there's a specific fire danger section as part of bomb?
Yeah, you can through their Met-Eye service, you can actually see with pretty good confidence what the predicted fire weather is going to be. And if it's going to trigger into what we call severe, then that will trigger for us a total fire ban. So anything below that, you're pretty fine. So you can get a good idea before you go of exactly what you're heading into.
Okay.
That's good to know, because I wasn't aware of that. I mean, I thought, yeah, you can have a look at the weather and the wind and maybe make your own intelligent prediction, but I actually wasn't aware that bomb had that specific fire danger prediction function to it, which is awesome.
Yeah, there's a couple of apps that I've along the way downloaded. One of them is Bushfire.io. I don't know how good these are or whether they're reliable or not. And there's another one, not so much for bushfires, but Emergency Plus is probably a good one. I think if you're in a situation, it is a good one to have to identify where you are.
Yeah.
Obviously, Bomb's a very reliable app, and it's good to know. I didn't know about that fire section either, so that's good to know. Is that what you would recommend primarily, the Bomb app, or are there others that you'd say are good as well?
That's where our decision making comes from. So we use the official bomb data to actually trigger the total fire bans. There is a really good app called Alert SA. Now, with the Alert SA, if you're going somewhere, you can actually set up a geofence of roughly where you're going to be. So if you're in phone reception and a fire starts near you, it will notify you that it's actually started, so you can keep your situational awareness around you.
Okay.
So you know exactly what's happening.
Is that just for South Australia, or do other states have similar?
Yeah, most other states will do it. So, for example, New South Wales has fires near me and the like. And I know Victoria has one through EMV Victoria as well.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
And so obviously everything that we've just discussed does rely on phone signal. So it'd be pretty important, I guess, if you're going in a very high risk area and you know the weather's not going to be great, to make sure you do have phone signal.
Yeah, either that or make sure that you've done your homework and you know that potentially maybe one of the days might be a fire day or whatever, but as long as you're prepared, you can work yourself around it.
So if you have a radio, obviously through your vehicle, or if you do pack a battery-powered radio with you, is it the ABC channel that would give you the same information as some of these apps?
Yeah, so when a fire starts, we do a notification process. So the ABC is the one that we actually recommend.
So if people find themselves in a situation and no phone reception, hopefully radio reception's there, and ABC is a good place to go to find out what the latest advice is. Yeah,
absolutely. And people can actually set up little radio trees or telephone trees amongst themselves as well. So, and what I mean by that is if people know where you're going and you've got radio contact in and out, you can actually set up a regular contact with them so that they can say, oh, look, tomorrow's going to be a total fire ban. So then you can change what you're going to do and how you're going to do it.
Okay. So obviously we mentioned before about radios and potentially having a battery-powered radio. Is there any other recommendations of what you should pack if you're travelling into a bushfire risk zone? I mean, we, living in the Adelaide Hills and things like that, there's always been a lot of education around having a bushfire kit at home. What would you recommend for people doing car camping or four-wheel drive touring?
Yeah, look, a couple of the best things that they can pack is make sure they've got adequate drinking water, and that also can assist you in the event of a fire, that you actually have some water that hopefully you don't have any burns, but you can treat yourself for burns using that water. The biggest other issue is a woolen blanket to give you some sort of protection from the radiant heat. And that is the key of survival when you're out and about too. We talk about a hierarchy of survival. So having a solid barrier between you and the fire itself is the best protection you can have. And when we talk about that, that's things like a building, your home. It could be a shelter or something of the like, or a really big tree that you can actually put between you and the fire. The next one is your vehicle, is being inside your vehicle and being below the window height, because the radiant heat will actually travel through the windows as well. So if you're actually below, that creates that little bit of a barrier. And this is where the woolen blanket comes in. You can actually cover yourself so that it gives you some sort of insulation between the heat in the car and yourself. And then out in the open, the best thing you can do is to actually get yourself into a hollow or behind a solid object, behind a large rock, or into some sort of crevice, and that'll give you the best chance of survival out in the open. But if you are trapped and the fire is coming towards you, do not go uphill, do not go downhill, go sideways. So try and get yourself out of the path of the fire by moving sideways. If the smoke's coming towards you, then you know the fire is coming towards you. Don't try and outrun it. Try and move to the sides.
Right.
Okay.
Good advice.
So people should essentially just make sure they've got a couple of woolen blankets in their car if they're travelling, just to be on the safe side.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the best things that we can recommend. We have them in all of our fire trucks as well, although our fire trucks have deluge systems, but we still carry the blankets just in case.
And for those, probably obvious for most, but that's because wool doesn't burn, right? Synthetic is going to melt, cotton burns, wool doesn't burn. And I think if you wet it as well, is that a correct bit of advice?
Yeah, the biggest problem with wetting your woolen blanket is that the water, once it actually heats up, it turns into steam. So if you have that near your body, it potentially could actually create burns. So you're better off not to wet it.
Okay.
But wool is a natural insulator, and it's probably the best sort of blanket you can have.
Well, that's pretty good news for me because I have a bit of a secret op shop addiction and a stash of about maybe 15 to 20 vintage woolen blankets in the top of my wardrobe. So I'll dedicate some of those to the van for sure.
Yeah, and look, a woolen blanket has double use too. You can use it as your picnic blanket, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're camping, the more options you have for that one device, the better off you are.
Yeah, okay. I'll have to get some woolen blankets.
Yeah, you can have some of mine. Bushfire Refuges as well, Phil. I mean, I know sort of around being in the Adelaide Hills where a lot of the local ones are. Or how do you locate them easily, or is there a simple, quick and easy way of finding your local or closest refuge at all?
Do you mean like a last resort refuge? Yeah.
Like if you're travelling somewhere in the country and you know that there's a bushfire coming, how do you know where the refuge is if you have an opportunity to go there?
Yeah, so our website has both the Bushfire Safer Places and the Last Resort Refuges listed.
Okay.
And it's just as easy on the front page of our website. You can enter in the town that you're sort of near or heading to, and it will basically highlight to you whether there's a last resort refuge or whether there is a safer place. Now, while you've brought up that topic, there's basically two tiers. So the Bushfire Safer Place is somewhere that is potentially going to give you the best chance of survival. So it's a place where there's low vegetation, there's infrastructure. So it could be a township, and the boundary of the safer place is basically drawn with an adequate distance from the vegetation to be less than 2 kilowatts per square metre, so that is the threshold of survival. So on our website, it looks like a yellow shaded area, and if you're in there, you're relatively safe. But the more depth into that safer place, the safer you're going to be. There will be sparks, there will be embers, it will be hot, and it will be smoky. But the radiant heat, which is the killer, will not get to you because we've measured a lot of those places to be below that threshold. Your last resort refuges are basically exactly that. They're the place to go when every other plan has failed. You will not see a last resort refuge within a safer place because the safer place is a higher threshold. So places that you might see a last resort refuge might be a small township oval that has reduced vegetation, and we, again, have measured a lot of those to below that 2 kilowatts per square metre. There will be no services there. There will be no one there to assist you. There will be nothing there except for an open space. But we can pretty much tell you that we've measured that to be below that threshold. But in places like that, there are no guarantees. You're better off looking for a safer place or going into your last resort refuge as your last resort.
Okay, that's good to know. I know when I travelled recently through sort of the areas that have been affected by fire, so southern WA and also a bit around South Australia, that the last resort refuges are really well signed now. It seems to be a big thing now that there's just everywhere you go, there's signs pointing to last resort refuge, whatever it's called. And yeah, for the most part, when I did see them, it was a large oval. So interesting to know how you come about, how you classify that, and it's about radiant heat, because we're so used to seeing flames and sparks and smoke, right? But you can't see the heat, and it's probably not until you're in the thick of a fire that you understand how dangerous that radiant heat can be. I've never experienced it, but yeah, wouldn't want to.
I've never personally experienced it, but I was at TAFE when I was a bit younger, and we had someone from the CFS come in and do a fire safety thing. I was learning about conservation, land management, all that sort of jazz, and we watched about half an hour of footage from the Canberra fires at that time, and it was literally insane. Like I don't think there's any other word for it, but insane. Like the dash cam of a 4-drive racing around trying to get people and clear people out, and I've never seen anything like it.
Must be scary.
Yeah. And the thick smoke turns day into night, and you would have seen that in the Canberra footage. And it is incredible because I said before, it's going to be hot. It will be smelly. It will stink of smoke. There will be a lot of smoke. Visibility will be poor, and you'll be confused. And it sounds like a hurricane because essentially when a fire of that size is there, it's starting to draw air from 360 degrees around it and suck it in. So it sounds like a hurricane or a cyclone coming through. And we draw the analogy of being next to a freight train.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Because that's what it sounds like.
Yeah,
wow.
Right. So we touched a bit before on things that people can do when they are caught in a fire, and a lot of that information applies to people who are hiking or bushwalking or bicycle touring and things like that. When it comes to travelling in bushfire season, is someone will have a PLB on them, which is something that a lot of adventurers take with them. If they are on foot, they don't have access to a vehicle, they're essentially in the middle of nowhere. Is that a situation where they can activate their PLB and expect support, or is it likely to just be a situation where everyone is focused on the bushfire and trying to sort of help individual people on a PLB activation isn't going to happen?
Yeah. So during an emergency like a bushfire, if they're threatened and they're not feeling safe, then by all means that's what they're going to do. They're going to activate their PLB. But because it's inside of another emergency event, it's going to be pretty difficult to actually get someone in to get them out, because we're going to be concentrating on trying to contain that fire as best we can. But at least we know that there are people there, or there's people in the area. But people need to be prepared to move out of the way of the fire. And essentially you just need to try and work out which way the fire's going and move to the side of it. The reason I actually say move to the side is because you'll never outrun a fire. And if you're trying to go uphill, a fire will actually travel up to 10 times quicker uphill than it will going downhill. So it will travel significantly quicker, and if you're trying to outrun it, then it's not going to work. So going to the side, and the sides of a fire are generally of lower intensity anyway. So you have lower radiant heat coming out of the side of the fire than you do the head fire. So, and then the more distance you can put between you and the fire itself, it reduces the radiant heat quite considerably.
Okay, so ultimately the key is preparation. Just know the area where you're going, be prepared, educate yourself.
Yeah. What about how sensitive, I guess, if there's any sense or smell of smoke or anything when people are out hiking, there's no one else around, they smell a puff of smoke, they've got phone reception. Do you guys want to know straight away? Like, how sensitive should people be?
Well, if they can smell smoke while they're out, is to try and identify where it's actually coming from, and if it's just a campfire and stuff, then generally, if they can deal with it, that's great. If it's not being able to deal with, or a very small fire, then we need to know pretty quick so that we can get crews there before it gets bigger. And in a lot of these other areas, and let's talk outback South Australia, that we might be 200 or 300 k's away before we can actually get there. So potentially that fire can grow quite substantially before we can actually get resources there, because we still have that tyranny of distance in some of these outback locations. In the Mount Lofty ranges or the more built-up areas, our response times are considerably reduced from hours to minutes, just because we have the population of people and we have the concentration of resources there.
Mm-hmm. So Mount Lofty ranges for our interstate listeners is here in South Australia, but I guess the same applies to ranges close to city areas in other states.
Or built-up country areas.
Built-up country areas, yeah. So you'd rather a phone call, and I guess people are thinking, do I need to stretch resources on I think I might smell smoke, I can't work out where it is, it's total fire ban. You'd rather have a phone call and look into it than have someone think, I'll just see if it gets worse and then call if I see a fire.
Yeah, that's right. And in some areas of the state, we actually do active prescribed burning as well. So it could be that the fire that they can see or smell might be a controlled fire, but the phone operators at our call receipt and dispatch centre have set questions that they can go through, and it helps identify where they are, what they can see, what they can smell, and then if it is an unreported fire already, then we can get resources going.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah, I'm gonna. I think we've basically covered most of the stuff around travelling in bushfire season. I want to actually pick your brains about fire ban season. And the reason why I want to do this is because I'm involved in a couple of camping groups, social media camping groups. They're, state-based and national-based. And there does seem to be a lot of confusion out there amongst people in the community about what constitutes a fire ban season, when it starts, what you can and can't do. People who are still having, raging bonfires in the middle of summer because it's a comfort fire or whatever. So let's just start by going through what's the most reliable source of a fire ban season date?
Okay. Well, to answer that, I'll actually explain how we actually come up with the dates.
Okay, that'd be great.
Because it does vary across the whole state. So essentially, we dry out because we're so large. We dry out from the west to the south. So and there could be differences of 4 to 6 weeks in between the west coast drying out and the area around Mount Gambier drying out. So to minimise inconvenience not only to the farming industry but the community and the camping industry, we try and stagger those dates. So the state is broken up into 15 fire ban districts, and they will generally start, and the ones to start first are the West Coast, Northwest Pastoral and Northeast Pastoral, Eastern Air, Lower Air, and then it moves across the state into the Flinders, Mid-North, Adelaide Metro, Upper Southeast, Riverland and Lower Southeast. So it all tracks across. I don't want to leave Kangaroo Island out, Kangaroo Island has its own fire ban district, and generally, that's one that does fluctuate quite a lot because it depends on how the island has gone with rainfall. And there's the key. So what we do is in the lead up to the traditional seasonal dates, we actually liaise with the local bushfire management committees, and we get recommendations from them, and then we base on risk, fuel loads, the dryness of the fuels, and then we sort of look at a crystal ball to when the season might finish. And more often than not, we may extend the season if we don't quite get those ending dates right. So this all happens in October, and then by the 1st of November, which is generally when the first district might look at coming in, if it's an early season, we would have the dates published on our website. So what the fire danger season actually brings is restrictions on the use of stuff. And you talked about comfort fires before. So during or outside of a fire danger season doesn't mean that you don't have a total fire ban day, because there could be a day on what we call the cusp of the season that is outside the season, but it's a significant risk day, so we will declare a total fire ban, and we do that through the media, and it's all declared, and the restrictions are put in place. During the fire danger season, the same process happens for a total fire ban day, but the restrictions are already in place for things like the use of equipment, vehicles in long grass, stationary engines, the use of physical fire. So a lot of farmers will do broadacre burning, and if they don't do it in the off-season, they then have to get a permit from their local council to actually undertake those activities. So your campfires or your comfort fires during the fire danger season, the restrictions have come in that you can still have these campfires, but they need to be less than 1 metre square. You must have an extinguishing agent at hand. It needs to be in a 30-centimetre trench, so basically dug into the ground, and there needs to be a responsible person in attendance who can control that campfire from the time it's lit to the time it's fully extinguished. Now, when we talk a responsible person, I've been on many a camping trip, and the responsible person needs to be someone not affected by alcohol and drugs and of an age that they can control that fire. So hence that's where the interpretations come in. On a total fire ban day, then no campfires are permitted at all, full stop. So let's talk about braziers or above ground fires and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're banned essentially under legislation because they're not in a 30-centimetre trench. So a lot of the braziers and the like that you can buy from Bunnings or places like that are technically not permitted because they're not in a 30-centimetre trench.
We have a lot of people who think, the fire's not on the ground. It's okay. I haven't got a fire on the ground. But it's actually the opposite to what they're thinking. It actually needs to be in the ground if you're having a fire during the fire ban season. So really the braziers, the fire pits that we sell at Snowy's, they're only for non-fire ban season.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they can be done via a permit, but permits are not easy to get hold of because they're administered by local governments, and generally they will want to come and do an inspection, and if you're only camping, then it's not worth going through that process to actually do it. So you're better off just dig a little hole, and a lot of people decorate it with rocks so it looks like a traditional campfire, and then have their fire in the ground.
Now, we have referenced that the comfort fire, because I know a few people who have had fires in fire ban season and they just chuck a couple of spuds in foil in there just in case someone comes along and is like, what do you got a fire for? They're like, we're cooking, even if they don't really have an intention to eat the potatoes. So you don't have to be cooking on it. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So the exemption in our legislation essentially is you can have a fire for comfort or for cooking.
Okay.
So it's one of those two. Now, what I haven't discussed is in some areas fires are not permitted under the EPA legislation.
Okay.
And that's because of the smoke causes a nuisance. But generally, when you're camping, you're not in areas that are affected by that. So most of that clause is around inside townships and the like.
Okay.
So if you're in a caravan park, generally the caravan park will tell you whether you can have a campfire or not. Mm-hmm. But if you're then camping within a township, that's just another step that you'll need to do so that you don't get prosecuted under the EPA legislation.
Okay.
Backyard camping is becoming a thing now with COVID lockdowns and things. People are camping in their backyard. So am I right in saying if they want to understand what they are and are not allowed to do in their backyard, then their local council has usually got regulations on what they should do there?
Yeah, absolutely. And because they administer the legislation for the Environmental Protection Agency, then they're best placed to actually give the advice based on that location. So,
and just one other quick one with everything you said about because you're from South Australian Country Fire Service, and you say that the dates you put in place go from west to south in South Australia. Do all the other states apply the same process to how they put their dates in place? Can our listeners interstate sort of assume that what you're saying here in South Australia is similar to where they live?
Yeah, it is very, very similar. I know that the Northern Territory actually do the whole state based on one thing. Western Australia, not exactly sure what their process is, but they also advertise on their own website on when the restrictions come in. Victoria and New South Wales are exactly the same as us. They go through a process and they stagger their dates as well. But the best place for information is each agency's individual websites.
Okay. Sorry, I've got another question.
No, that's okay.
Should I go?
Yeah, go.
Another question then. So a common thing, I guess, this touches a little bit on before with what you said that about caravan parks allowing gas cookers and things. National parks have their own rules around that. Quite often a national park will have a sign that says no gas fires allowed. Now, some people, there's not just gas burners. Within our range at Snowy's, we sell a lot of gas burners, but there's also multi-fuel stoves, and that can be as simple as like a Trangia, which is a metho stove, and also Shellite, which is takes a liquid fuel from a fuel canister, and then it turns into gas. Do you know if when they say gas stoves, are they just talking about LPG?
No, they're talking about all of those types of fuels. Yep. So even the, and I'm not sure of the technical term, but the pellets that you can use as well.
Oh, well, they're called hex bricks or something.
Oh, yeah. Solid fuel.
Yeah. So basically anything either solid fuel or gas or even the liquid, yes, they're all covered under the same terminology. And that comes back to the intent behind the writing in the legislation. So it covers all of those.
Okay, that's good to know.
So we talked before about in South Australia anyway, being able to have a comfort/cooking fire under all the parameters that you outlined, but gas stoves and cookers and things like that outside of a caravan park are excluded.
Yeah, so the use of gas appliances and we can actually bundle in quite a lot of stuff into that arena as well. Things like angle grinders, gas soldering, oxy welding and all of that. They all come under the same banner because they're a gas appliance, for want of a better word. So the use of them are restricted by themselves as well. So they can only occur under certain circumstances. However, with your gas cooking, like I said before, if it's in a caravan park, you're exempt. So you can actually undertake those activities or within 15 metres of a domestic dwelling or a commercial premise.
Okay.
People still need to use common sense even in those instances, right? And make sure they're not using a gas stove right next to a dead tree or something like that. Like just clear the space around where you're cooking. If you've got a stove on the ground, just clear the leaf matter and stuff around from the stove, because I guess spillages can happen or it gets knocked over and one leaf becomes 2 leaves, and then it goes from there, doesn't it?
Yeah. So the legislation does dictate that you need to have 4 metres clearance. So, and when we talk clearance, it's not just sideways on the ground. It's got to be above as well. So any flammable vegetation that is around within that 4 metres should actually be cleared, so you have a nice clear buffer, and the chance of a fire escaping there is pretty minimal.
4 metres is heaps of
so it's a fair distance.
It is a fair distance.
Yeah.
What about generators, Phil? Because obviously then they don't require gas. What's the go with using those?
Okay, so there's 2 categories. There's an enclosed generator and then a non-enclosed generator. So most of the more modern type generators are what we'd call enclosed. And let's talk generally here in South Australia. An enclosed generator would only be used when you're camping if someone was there anyway. You wouldn't just set it and forget it.
Yeah.
So if someone is there and able to control it, then you just need to have an extinguishing agent, someone there, and a little bit of cleared space of 4 metres around it, and you're fine. If there was no one in attendance, then that brings in another set of regulations, which I'd have to look up for.
Okay. And I'm assuming if it's exposed as well, you're not allowed to use them. If you got like an old school one. Like, would you say an exposed or an open generator if you're old school?
So if it was non-enclosed, that puts a higher risk level on it because then vegetation and stuff can come in contact with the physical generator.
Yeah.
A lot of it will revolve around the exhaust system of the generator, and every stationary engine needs to comply with the legislation as far as exhaust systems go.
Okay.
So essentially, as long as all the exhaust gases go through the manufactured exhaust system and there's no leaks or escapes, then it's deemed to comply. So all vegetation also needs to not be able to come in contact with that exhaust system. So, and that's where your fully enclosed generators, which are probably the most common that you'll see around now, they're all enclosed, and the only thing you see is the hole for the exhaust. So they comply.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about extinguishing fires? Because I often see.
Before we go into that, I'm going to sneak in real quick.
Yeah, go on.
So another thing that's increasing in popularity with online chats about, in the camping community is with the increase of solar and 12-volt power and the development of batteries and things like that, a lot more people are looking into induction cooktops to take with them. And that's obviously with the assumption that they can be used year-round regardless of fire ban status. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
Wow. I expected you to say,
I just feel like
enough,
mic drop. Boo. I really expected that would be of course it's fine.
Because there's no flame, right? So I guess it's easy to assume it's okay to use it. But I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So the only thing with an electric cooker is on a declared day of total fire ban, you can only use your electric cooker or your gas cooker on the foreshore. And the description of a foreshore basically is from the low tide watermark through to the first standing bush or grass.
Okay.
So essentially that is the foreshore, and that's the only time that you can actually use your gas or electric cooking device.
Right.
In saying that, you go to a lot of parks that have barbecues supplied, and some of them are gas, some of them are electric. They're excluded from that requirement because they're a maintained commercial system.
Okay.
And they're pretty much guaranteed that they're going to comply with 4 metre clearance. So they're very low risk. So they've been excluded. But for your induction cooking or gas cooking can only be done on a total fire ban day on the foreshore. Right. Outside of that, you
of course.
go for glory.
Yeah, right.
So on a total fire ban day, it's not just open flame; it's any heat source as such that this restrictions apply to.
Thanks for that, Phil. my partner's probably going to listen to this and be like, "Phew, saving myself a couple of grand in the battery and induction setup we were planning."
Yeah, you can spend that money somewhere else.
Yeah.
So extinguishing a fire. Firstly, you mentioned people having a fire and a suitable source to extinguish that. Now, a bucket of water is an obvious one there. What else can people have? Is a bucket of sand suitable? A small fire extinguisher?
Yeah, so it's going to come down to what's appropriate for the use. So we don't recommend people put sand on campfires, and there's a number of reasons behind that. The biggest being that you're trapping in the heat. So someone could actually walk over it and fall into it and receive burns because you just can't see what's happening. So we want people to extinguish campfires, etc., with water because it's the best extinguishing agent there is. Now, the key to extinguishing a fire is to create small droplets of water. So if you can mist the water by using like a knapsack or and a knapsack is one of the firefighting devices that we generally use that you put on your back and you squirt, or a charged water extinguisher, they actually disperse the water into droplets. Now, the droplets, without getting too technical, will absorb the heat very, very quickly. What you do is when you tip a bucket of water over, you're basically drowning it, and then the water seeps into the sand and it's gone. So it really isn't very good at extinguishing a fire. And hence that's why a lot of the hoses on the fire trucks you see give a bit of a fan spray because it absorbs the heat, which actually takes the fire away and extinguishes it a lot more effectively. So doing that, a lot of cars have a dry chemical extinguisher, which is a white powder, and using that is really good because it takes away the oxygen and cools the fire at the same time. So that is another way of extinguishing some of the fires. But it's not practical when you're camping to actually put out a campfire using that method. So water is the most common method. But if you can break the water up rather than dumping a bucket of water on it, it's actually more effective.
Okay. And should they sort of spread the coals a little bit? A lot of people just leave the coals bundled, and then, I mean, that's the classic way of getting a fire started the next morning, isn't it? You kind of leave the coals bundled up, and then you can throw some small kindling on it and get the fire started again. So a lot of people will just sort of throw some water on there, walk away, but that heat's still contained within the soil and all those coals. So
rake it out.
I've always raked it out a little bit just to try and, or like you said, let the heat disperse. Am I correct in doing that?
Yeah, so at night, if you're not going to use the fire in the morning, spread it out because it will actually cool down really well overnight. But if you're going to use it again in the morning, then once you've finished, just spread it out a bit, dump a little bit of water on it and make sure it's cool to touch, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, okay. All right. All good information.
Yeah. If you because I'm assuming if you do have, you mentioned the dry chemical fire extinguishers in your car, they're for emergency use. You, as you said, you're not, especially if you're in a caravan park or a campground, you're not going to be just putting out your fire every time you want to pack up and leave with a fire extinguisher, are you? But I'm assuming for people who might want to do that, is there considerations with using those sorts of, as far as you're aware, those sorts of fire extinguishers from an environmental perspective?
The biggest thing is that the powder itself, and it's ironic that we actually use those in cars, because they're probably one of the most effective fire extinguishers to use on a vehicle fire. However, once you've used it, you need to clean it off very, very quickly because the chemical agents in that powder will actually work away, and eat away at your electrical components.
Okay, cool.
The more damage will be done, the more you actually leave that powder on.
Yeah, right.
So it's quite ironic. However, one of the biggest issues you'll have is if you're susceptible to asthma or something like that, because it is a white powder, and because it does actually catch in the wind, you can easily inhale it. So it's not one of the best things to actually use in an enclosed environment either. Or if you're going to do it, make sure you're upwind so that you actually don't get a lung full of the chemical powder.
So maybe a small spray bottle or something's a good option to have to just.
You could get even, those you can get from Bunno's, like those 10-litre hand pump pressure bottles with a sprayer. That seems like a good idea.
Yeah, they're great. They're a weed sprayer or a garden sprayer. Yeah.
Yep. Well, I think we've pretty much covered most of what we had to chat about today, Phil. How can people generally get involved in sort of bushfire safety or with their local country fire organisation? What's the best way you'd recommend for people to find out more?
Look, if people are just after information and just wanting to keep themselves up to date, then our website and our Facebook page and social media is the best way to do it, because we keep a lot of the information up to date. If they want to become involved in the community and become a volunteer, then we have a volunteer recruiting line. But jump online and have a read of what we do and how we do it and what opportunities there are, and then go into the recruitment process. A lot of the local brigades in a lot of the country towns welcome people just to drop in and say hello. And that's a good way to actually get to know your locals as well.
I'm all out of questions. That was good.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I hope our listeners cleared up all the grey areas around those fire ban dates and just what constitutes a fire that they can use in those dates, because we get those questions a lot and there's a bit of confusion around it. So it should be a good conversation on the Facebook group, I reckon.
Brilliant.
Yeah, on our website we've got a link in there, and there's a little bit of a graph that says what can I do, what can't I do. And as things change, we keep that up to date. So if people want to check that from time to time, if there are any regulation changes, then that's reflected in what I can and can't do.
Yeah.
So that's a really good source of information. And our interactive web map on the front page is really good too. There's a lot of layers that they can turn on and off, and they can actually see a whole heap of stuff on there as well. So it's a really good source of information.
Brilliant.
We'll put what links we can in the show notes anyway for all of this stuff. Check it out ourselves. Yeah. Well, I think we're done, Phil. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been really informative, and I'm sure our listeners are going to love it. We really appreciate your time.
No, you're welcome.
All right, well, that's it for another episode. Like we mentioned at the start, if you like this and you haven't already done so, please subscribe either via YouTube, your favourite podcast app, and join in on the conversation at the Snowies Camping Show Facebook group. We'll see you next week for another episode.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.